Buddy, it's my next episode of Fight Quest Stories, and I have to change the numbering around. I called the last episode Episode 4 because I forgot I didn't call the prologue an episode. We'll talk about the audition and all that stuff. It's a prologue, not an episode. So I got to change that around. I'll make this Episode 4. So, quick caveat here. The first 3 episodes, in order of filming, we filmed in the Philippines first, then we did China, then we did Japan. Anything after that, in the middle, gets a little confusing. I think Savate was next, which is the episode I'm doing now. But the middle episodes, I don't remember exactly the order we did them in. I remember the beginning, I remember the end, but the middle kind of all blurs together a little bit. Because, remember, they weren't aired in the order they were shot necessarily. Most of the time they were, but they switched around a couple of them. So that's why it gets a little confusing. They started switching around the orders of the episodes, and I forget which one was filmed. And remember, we did them back to back, basically. So we would fly in there, spend roughly 13 days in the country filming and all that stuff, and then we'd be home for a week? Maybe a week, and then we go out again. So they were back to back to back. So they all kind of bleed in together, except the end, and I will go into the whole drama about the last 3 episodes and all that stuff when we get there. But, so Savate in Marseille. First thing I remember about Marseille, it's a beautiful place. It's right on the coast in France, and we're walking around the port area. It's me and the crew. We're, looking for places to shoot B-roll stuff and everything. People walk up to you on the street, and they go, "Oh, American." And you're like, "Yeah, I'm American." Hashish. Everybody comes up to you, and it's near North Africa. Obviously, southern France is near northern Africa. Hash is everywhere. Hash is much bigger in northern Africa. And hashish is everywhere. Everybody's selling hash. And once they find out you're American, which means you have money, everybody's trying to sell you hash on the street. So a lot of the crew was high a lot of the time. So I was not while training. I don't. It's funny. If you see me on Joe Rogan's show, and we ended up smoking weed together. I don't do it that consistently. I don't do it that often. And in California, where it's legal, and I had a prescription for years because I have a sleeping problem. I only do it. Actually, when I trained really hard, I would. Not back when I was fighting as much, because even though they didn't test back then. If I'm training really hard, and anyone who's done jiu-jitsu, or really probably any sport on the competitive level, I would finish at like 9 o'clock, and you're all keyed up from training, and you can't sleep, or you're sore. So that's a combination. And that's the only time I really smoke weed is to get over that, because you don't want to get on painkillers. So anyway, a lot of the crew was high. A lot of times it was just hash everywhere, and it was super duper cheap. So anyway, that was the first experience we had in Marseille, is walking around, people trying to sell us weed. So Savate itself as a style. I was talking to one of the guys, one of the coaches. We had this big post-fight dinner. Really amazing. Obviously, we're in southern France. The food is really good. And he was asking me, how do we make Savate big in the United States? You want to take Savate to the U.S. and all this stuff? And I said, look, the problem you're going to have is Savate's really goofy as a style. And what I mean by that is you could only punch so many times before you'd kick. You're only allowed to kick with your shoe, with the foot. You can't kick with the shin. You had to wear the unitard uniform. There were all these things that made Savate, while it was a legit style, I mean, they had a world championships, they had competitive matches, and people really got knocked out and beat up. The rules were just so specific and difficult, and it didn't translate well. In terms of, kickboxing is niche already. It's already a niche sport, especially in the United States. And if you want it to come to the U.S. and compete against kickboxing, you have to take away all the things that make it Savate. You have to kick with everything. Your shin, you have to clinches weren't allowed, knees weren't allowed, elbows weren't allowed. You're taking on styles where all that stuff is legal, and you're going to get beat up if you have to stick to the Savate style. So in a sense, what was so interesting about Savate when I was training it was the things that make it unique as a style also really limit it in terms of its overall appeal. And So I told the guys that. I said, if you want to compete with kickboxers in the United States and kind of make this big when MMA is getting big, where everything's allowed, you can't get away with these ticky-tack rules that make Savate. So when we were there, I think I was the city person. I remember in this episode, there wasn't a huge difference between the city and the country. Usually somebody goes out to the country, somebody stays in the city. That was a division between Doug and I. There wasn't a huge difference because Marseille isn't like a crazy big town. It isn't super industrial where there's like a big city. It isn't like that. So it wasn't visually that different being in the country and in the city. So there were some interesting things that came out while I was filming the Savate episode that would be an issue doing FightQuest throughout the run. And one of them was I was sparring this kid. He was 19 years old. They brought him in, and he was like the Savate national champion for his age group and weight class. And they had a spar, and I'm trying to figure out this style. And anyone who's done any kind of combat sports before, it's the difference. And one of the things in FightQuest you saw all the time is the difference in styles changes everything. You can be great at Kyokushin and then do Muay Thai, and the rules are different, and it takes a while to get used to it. So this was my first day sparring, and they really hammered home. The coaching team I had really hammered home Savate. They were always, meaning when I would start boxing or when I would start doing something else, or like even stylistically, even though the rules were, I wasn't breaking the rules, they wanted me to do everything Savate style. Not just the rules of Savate, but the style of Savate. Meaning throw punches like Savate. Don't move your head and do all this stuff that you're doing. Or don't. When they kicked, they did a lot of leaning back on the one foot and stuff like that. And they wanted me to do honor to the style. That was always getting hammered at me whenever I was sparring, whenever I was training. So I'm taking on this kid. And once again, he's a Savate national champion for his age group. And I got beat up in the sparring. Now, I didn't get hurt. He didn't land anything significant. He wasn't that strong. He didn't hit that hard. But in terms of tactically, I was just he was hitting me a lot more than I was hitting him. I'm trying to remember all these rules and stay true to the style, and the dude already knows it. And he beat me up in the sparring session. So it's a hard thing to understand if you haven't done it. But in MMA, we're always getting beaten up. Always. When Floyd Mayweather spars in boxing, he beats up his sparring partners. He's the best boxer of his generation. So mixed martial artists, no matter how good you are at one particular thing, they're always bringing in people that kick your ass at that one thing. Meaning Damian Maia might have the kind of jiu-jitsu where it's hard to find somebody that could beat him or challenge him in jiu-jitsu. You could find somebody, a current world champion, somebody kicking ass right now, but even then Damian Maia could probably hang with him. Damian Maia is not a great boxer. So when he spars boxing or kickboxing, he gets beaten up. He's not a great wrestler. If you took Damian Maia and took him to the wrestling room at Penn State, he gets taken down all the time. So mixed martial artists, unlike other fighters in other combat sports, we get beaten up all the time because there's always something we're not great at. Khabib has great wrestling. Khabib doesn't have great wrestling if you took him to the Olympic Training Center, or you took him once again to the wrestling room at Penn State or Ohio State. There are plenty of guys in there that could take him down. Khabib has great boxing. Well, not compared to really elite boxers or really elite kickboxers. So they're always bringing in people that can beat you up at your particular thing. So an ass whooping in MMA doesn't mean very much. Even the best fighter in the world, I don't care who it is, they'll find somebody who can beat you up at something. You might be great at one thing, somebody else will beat you up. So mentally, getting beaten up in MMA doesn't mean a whole lot to us. We don't go, oh man, I got beat up today. It's a normal day for us to get beat up. And that's where I was at that time. I was training MMA. So I finished the sparring session, I got beat up. I just started unwrapping my gloves, and the producer came over, the shooter producer, they're one person generally, came over and started asking me about the sparring session, like how did it go, and da-da-da. And I was like, yeah, got beat up, but whatever. And she started kind of like yelling at me or like trying to get under my skin and get an emotional reaction out of me because she didn't like the fact that I got beat up in sparring and it didn't seem to bug me that much. She wanted like an emotional response for me to get really upset or like break down or like, oh my God, or like, but a professional fighter doesn't do that. We get beat up and you take your ass whooping, you put some ice on it, and you go home and you spar the next day. Everybody has off days. And That's not a style I'm any good at. I don't know how to do Savate. So if I'd gotten beaten up at something I'm really good at, then it's a little upsetting. But I'm not great at this. So you just kind of take it in stride. Well, that wasn't good enough. Remember, this is a television show. They want emotion. They want, oh my God, this is so devastating. And I didn't do that. So she starts kind of like fucking with me. She starts like, kind of yelling at me and kind of getting in my face in order to prompt an emotional reaction out of me. I am not 12. I'm not going to just be prompted in an emotional reaction. That's not going to happen. So what I did is I stopped the shoot and I was like, look, I forget her name. And I said, if you want an emotional reaction out of me, I'll just make one. Like, I'll just pretend to be more upset than I really am, if that would make you happy. Like, we're making a TV show here, okay? Like, I'll just pretend to be really upset. So there's this interview of me after the sparring session where I'm really upset and down and everything, and it's not real. Like, I'm not really that upset. I was just pretending to be upset because that's what she wanted. It's one of the few times I really did that. I really didn't do that any other time, but she was just like really upset that I wasn't more mad about this sparring session. So I just kind of made it up. I was like, oh yeah, it really sucks. I don't really care. Getting beaten up is not a huge deal under any circumstances, let alone a style you don't know very well. But it was one of those things where there's a contrast between what a real fighter would do and what happens in a real gym and what you do when you're making a television show. And that was one of those things, is they wanted emotional responses to stuff that to a fighter isn't emotional. And your average fan, or average, not even fan, because a lot of people watch Fight Quest weren't fight fans. Your average television viewer doesn't understand getting beaten up and going, no big deal. A fighter would, maybe a fight fan would, but your average person watching television doesn't understand that. So that was one thing that would be, I don't want to say an issue later, but a consistent theme in Fight Quest was they wanted reactions to stuff that a fighter wouldn't have. And that was the first one of that. Then the training I received was a lot of footwork, a lot of distance, a lot of movement, because Savate is they really fight at a much longer distance than most combat sports because they're only allowed to kick with a foot. And so you have to either turn the foot over and kind of use that as a point and really be accurate with it, or you're always on the outside kicking with the bottom of your foot. So the range in Savate is way further out than most combat styles. They don't punch a whole lot, and when they do, it's all based on the kick. And they're only allowed to punch so many times before they kick. You can't just go in and box. So a lot of my training was at a distance. We use this thing where, it's my dog, where we would have this, they would hold pads, and they'd always keep me moving at a distance, at this one certain distance in order to be able to use my foot all the time. So it was really interesting training. They knew what they were doing. They introduced me to this style that I used to use a lot, this training technique, where I would hit a bag, and they would have a timer, and they would say it was 5 seconds and 5 seconds, and it was 10 seconds and 10 seconds, and it was 15 and 15, up to a minute. And what it was 5 seconds of attacking the bag, and then 5 seconds of defense where you're moving around the bag. Then 10 seconds attack, 10 seconds defense. 15 seconds attack, 15 seconds defense. And all the way up to a few minutes. It was long. But it was that back and forth where sometimes you're moving and sometimes you're attacking, and they require different pacing. If you've ever trained fighting, you know that. So that was a technique I brought home with me. And I really used that with people, and they really liked it. And it was really effective. So every time I would fight in Fight Quest, I would almost always bring something back home and go, oh man, that's good. And use that to train people. And that was one that I brought. He had a stopwatch, and it was back and forth. Offense, defense, was getting longer and longer. Also, we ran these sprints back and forth. So, which a lot of people have done before. Like in basketball, you go back and forth across the court. It was like that, except they had a timer that would beep. And so you had to set a pattern of beep, 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 and then it would get faster, beep, 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 beep. But the hard part is in the beginning, because you're running fast, because you're supposed to, but you had to be slower to get the timing, and then you would naturally get faster as you went, and the timer would get faster and faster and faster. So they did a lot of that stuff. Effective training, good stuff. I respected them. So there's this one incident that, once again, would be a recurring theme in Fight Quest. And I have to talk about this. Once again, we're making a television show. You're not getting you ready for a fight. And one of the things that, when you're getting ready for a fight, you have to have is trust. You have to have faith in your instructor. My instructor right now is a guy named Manny Suarez down here in Delray Beach, Florida. Carlson Gracie. Really great guy. I really love him. Love training with him. If I walk into the gym and he says 100 push-ups on your knuckles, I assume that's going to make me a better fighter. If he says dance around in a circle and say the Pledge of Allegiance, you assume that's going to make you a better fighter. So there has to be that trust level, because they're going to ask you to do things that are physically really hard, that are difficult, that are painful, that are miserable, whatever they are, that make you puke. You have to trust that they're trying to make you a better fighter. When you don't feel that, everything breaks down, because then you start questioning everything they tell you. The problem with making a television show that's based on fighting is the things that are good for TV aren't necessarily good for you. And I talked about this a little bit in the Japan episode with Doug getting beaten up in sparring, and I think he was concussed. I know he was concussed. And he had all these physical problems, and nobody in the crew or the producer or anything even had him checked out or anything, because it was great TV to watch Doug get beat up. And his knee was swollen, and nobody had it checked out and all these things. So there was, you getting beat up is great for TV. And so the instructor was given free reign to do whatever he wanted with Doug. And that trust level breaks down, because they're trying to make great television, not make you a great fighter. And once again, a lot of times the person we faced at the end was associated with the school we were training with. They didn't want their guy to lose. So there were trust issues. So the way it came out in France, and you see if you watch the episode, I get dropped by a liver shot. It's the first time I've ever been dropped in sparring, ever. It's the only time. And here's how it happened. I was sparring the guy. He was my instructor, and he was about 6'4", big guy, tall, rangy, and he knew the style very well. So he was good at Savate. I think he was a world champion in his day and all that stuff. So the day in question that I was talking about, we were sparring. And we sparred a long time, about 20 minutes. And he's a tough guy, strong, skilled. So while we were sparring, I was really, really tight. Really tight. Hands up, elbows in, chin down. I was respectful of his power and his ability, and I was not going to let him hit whatever he wanted. So I had a really good sparring session. I was landing, he was landing, but he wasn't able to really do a whole lot to me, because I was very conscious of my defense. Very conscious of it. And I had a good defensive coach at the time, and so I just played good defense, had a good sparring session, and we kept going and going and going, and then it was over. It's all finished. Sparring session is done. He looks at me, and he goes, okay, now let's just move around a little bit to cool down. Okay, so we move around, and I loosen up, because we're just going to move around and cool down a little bit. Sometimes you'll end sparring a little, touch sparring or something like that to wind down. So I loosen up, we start moving around, and the fucker kicks me right in the liver and drops me. And as soon as I hit the ground, I was like, you fucking asshole. I got set up. I got totally set up. Where he couldn't... Here's my working theory, is the producer wanted footage of me getting dropped in sparring, and he couldn't do it. Why? My defense was just too tight when we were sparring. He couldn't really find an opening to drop me. And so he did this bullshit where he said, all right, let's just move around. And as soon as I let my guard down, he drills me in the liver. Now, anybody watching this, if you ever train combat sports or MMA or anything, that's fucked up. You wouldn't do that to somebody. I'm not going to say, all right, let's drill arm bars and then break your arm. Or, oh, let's do guillotine drills and then choke you out. Like, that's ridiculous. No coach on earth would ever do that to anybody. That's fucked up, because it breaks that trust you have with your fighter. Oh, let's drill arm bars, and then you break my arm. I'm never working with this person again, and B, I'm going to beat the shit out of you as soon as I heal up. So, anyway, the trust after that point was completely gone. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust the producer. I felt that I was set up. And so they dropped me with this liver shot. If you've ever taken a liver shot, it sucks. It's probably the worst punch you can get hit with. I've been hit hard all over my body, sparring with people of incredible level all over the world. I'd never been dropped before. I took that shoe right in. Remember, it's this hard kind of Savate shoe they use. And it went right into my liver, and it just dropped me. And we finished the sparring, and if you've ever been hit in the liver, you get sick. Your liver is basically a sponge full of toxins, and when it gets hit, it does this, and it releases all the toxins back into your system. And so I was like, that evening, I was like really nauseous. I didn't feel well. And so we're having dinner, and I go to the sink. The restaurant we were at had 2 bathrooms, and the sink for the bathroom was outside of the 2 bathrooms. So I'm over the sink, ready to puke. And one of the producers comes out, and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Bitch, I got kicked in the liver. I'm going to fucking throw up. Leave me alone." I was so mad. But that's what happened was, the producer probably talked to my coach and said, "We want footage of X, make it happen." And they do. And it isn't necessarily to your benefit. In fact, most times it's not to your benefit. But that would be a theme in Fight Quest 2, is that issue of the show or the producer, the production, influencing a relationship that's very, very intimate and relies on trust, and them getting in and fucking that trust up. So I didn't trust my coach as far as I could throw him after that. And I could throw him a long way. So let's keep that in mind, that I was like, oh, motherfucker, I could break your leg, but I'm not going to. So, yeah, that was a big thing in that episode and in future episodes. Was like, and I'll go into it. It gets a lot worse later. But those issues of they want something for television that looks good, and it involves you getting hurt or crippled or injured or this or that. And you're always paranoid after that. So when your instructor says, "Hey, put your hand in this bucket," you're like, "Is there a snake in there?" It's, you don't trust anybody, because it would look great if Jimmy, got bit by a snake, something like that. Another thing they did, they brought in a woman to spar with me, and she knew Savate. She knew what was going on. She was tiny, she was small, but she knew Savate. And I don't know what they thought I would do, or that I would be weirded out by that. I've trained with plenty of women. I don't treat them any differently than I would a small guy. Now, if I'm training with a small guy who's 125 pounds or something, I'm not going to hit him with everything I have. Period. I'm just not going to do that. So I didn't treat her any differently. I just didn't hit her as hard as I could. Meaning I moved around and, we did our thing. I just didn't hit her as hard as I could, because that's a dick move. So we're out there, and the bell rings, and we start going, and she threw a kick at me, and I slipped a kick, and I hit her with a punch. And just a jab, just a light punch, but, kind of snapped her head back. And I remember the producer going like, and I was like, "What'd you think I was going to do? You sent somebody out here to spar with me. I'm going to spar with him. I'm not going to hit her with everything I have. I'm not going to hurt her. But, we're going to move around. I'm going to take it comparatively seriously. She knows what she's doing. She was pretty good. It's Savate." So that was another thing. They thought they'd get, funny footage of me sparring, and that I would be all weirded out, and I wasn't. I was like, okay, I've trained with Jessica Aguilar and fighters like that were small but skilled, and you don't use your strength and your muscle, but you take it seriously, and that's what I did. So we had our final fight, and the coaches were really Savate, and I wasn't pleased with my performance in the final fight. I didn't think I did well at all, because I was constantly thinking about that. And then I saw Doug go out there, and he brawled and was really effective, and I was like, why couldn't I do that? And when we finished the fight, Doug and I were hanging out afterward, and we're talking at the rap dinner or whatever. And he goes, "Yeah, my guys told me to go in there and just treat it like a fight and beat the guy up and don't worry about Savate." And my coaches were really hammering me about Savate, and staying true to the style. And no matter what happens, you just do it like Savate. Whether you win or lose, that's what we want you to do. And so that's what I did. I didn't think I fought well at all. And then Doug was told, just go out there and brawl. And the guy was like, kind of taken aback. He just wasn't ready for that kind of style. And I remember being like, man, I should have done that. Or, I should have just gone out there and brawled and been much more effective. But that was the difference in the training. And that was the difference in the philosophy that we were trained with. So we just got a different philosophy when it came to the final fight and how to approach it. And I think it led to a good show, because you got to see both sides of it. And Doug just went in there and brawled, and I thought was effective and pushed the guy back a lot. And I was trying to do the outside Savate game, and I didn't think I was effective with it, but at least it showed what it was and how much you could learn in the time we had. So that was it. But I had a great time in France. The south of France is really beautiful. And then afterward, they gave us this boat trip. We were on this yacht around the harbor, and it was huge, and it was amazing, and we had a great time. The food was fantastic, and there was a lot of hash everywhere. So crew had a lot of fun with that. So that was Savate. There will be more of these to come, and it will get darker, and I I know everybody asks about Israel, and I will go into all of those things because the issues that kind of reared their head in France became much more pronounced in later episodes. But let me know what you think, and there'll be more to come. Thanks a lot for tuning in, as always.